Morning.
Morning. Now I'm going to give an introduction, I think. Might as well. So this is my friend Jolene I'm talking to. She lives on the other side of the mountains, and she's working on uh, a thesis proposal about forestry.
Yes, I have some questions for you, but I'll just like really quickly, I guess I'll just tell you what I'm doing. I'm taking Indigenous land stewardship with the Native Education College, and I'm just doing a thesis proposal. I'm going to be doing a larger paper on this. So what I get from you today is going to help me build my paper later on. Yeah, so I just have some questions that I'd like to ask you. And I don't know, I guess I'll just jump into it. I feel like I've got a fairly decent idea about logging practices. My dad was actually like a danger tree faller. He did a lot of that. He builds furniture. So like I spent a lot of time with him in the bush. We do go out and get our own firewood. So like we're out there and we go on the blocks. We go and salvage what we can from the blocks. So I have an idea, but not so much, being in the field working it. So that's why I thought about you. Okay, my first question was like, what effect do the clear cuts have on the land? And I kind of put like a bunch of bullet points underneath. And my first question about that was about the remaining trees that they leave on those clear cuts. Like a lot of times on a clear cut, I'll see like one or two little straggler trees left behind. And that always has confused me why they do that.
Sometimes those are not marketable trees. Sometimes they have nests in them, things like that. Um, it seems like these are almost two different questions, though. So, what effect does a clear cut have on the land? People who are very critical of clear cuts, they sit down in Vancouver and they make they join some lefty liberal forest group that Sierra Club or Western Canada Wilderness Committee, and they opine about how bad clear cuts are. And meanwhile, they are living in the biggest clear cut in the entire province, right? So there's this disconnect that's going on there between. And when you look at a farm, you don't look at a farm and say, "Wow, what a clear cut." You say, "What a beautiful farm." Right? So, in some ways, like one of the problems with clear cuts, first of all, is a marketing one, because we are always going to see it as a clear cut and not as some productive thing that we're doing. So, and I'm not defending clear cuts. I'm just trying to put it into some perspective as to what humanity's doing on the large. And it's like we don't consider Vancouver a nasty clear cut eyesore. We consider that habitation for humans. But I think it's a poor use of space, a lot of it. I don't think that those people have a right to point at me while they love living in their clear cut. So when I've been involved with logging, I reject their opinions because of who they are and where they live and what knowledge they actually have of the forest, right? Again, I'm not defending clear cuts because there's not a lot to defend in many ways. One thing about clear cuts that's really efficient is cost saving, right? So you want to build a road, particularly in the mountains, and you got steep country. Well, once you build a road up a steep logging block, at that point, the actual cost, and of course, this is a multi-million dollar company. I wish that phone would stop. This is a multi-million dollar company who's trying to make profits for investors and shareholders, right? So their priority. So there's this cost saving thing that happens, right? Like, and I would love to say no, everything should be select logging, but once you start pushing into an area that's steep and requires roads and bridges and things to get into there, well, now you're like, can we actually afford to single select tree remove that area? This is the argument amongst them.
Yeah, that was one of my questions at the bottom was obviously is clear cutting more profitable? And I already figured I knew the answer to that, but
Well, in the short run, right? So, like, again,
yes.
I'm not defending clear cuts because in the short run, it's a very profitable way to go about doing things. But then you get into a situation like West Fraser's in now, where here in Quesnel, they can't find marketable stands close enough to town to really turn a real profit anymore, right? And then because you have environmental rules and regulations of how much you can do, da 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 da, and how old forests can be, and so on and so forth, that once you're within a certain distance of Quesnel, it's all single select tree removal. whereas that wasn't always the case, right? Now they're pushing further out. So I spent all last winter timber cruising in the Chilcotins, way out there, and we weren't setting up massive clear cut blocks. We were setting up a grid pattern of clear cuts that were about 40 meters wide by 70 meters long or something to that effect, right? And it looks like
Okay.
a checkerboard from space when you look at it. And it's a better system in terms of because the cut blocks are very small and there's continuation. If you go through a forest, any forest, there's going to be gaps in the trees always, right? There's clearings and openings and things where things have fallen down and taken a long time to grow back there, or it's just too rocky or whatever, right? So clearings are normal, and animals like them. You know, there's nothing wrong with creating clearings. The only problem I have with the system is that they leave too much slash wood. So what could have been a useful project to prevent uh, catastrophic forest fires has instead left lots of fuel that is now a problem to be left behind, right? So if somehow we had efficiency, like say the Europeans had, where we could go and make this quilt work of, and those forests were, you know, they weren't awesome forests. Like it's not like I felt bad about cutting the forest per se, because an old growth tree in the Chilcotin's like this big because of the climate and the way it is, right? And a lot of the forests are blown over, smashed down. There's been huge fires. Uh, so it is an area that kind of needs forest management and needs some help. But when you leave all this slash wood, now some companies are better than others, right? Like I'll tell you for a fact that Blackwater Logging and Quesnel are very good loggers. These are guys, they don't leave big slash piles. They don't make a huge fucking mess of the forest. These quilt systems are rather non-invasive compared to a big open clear cut block. And why they're really helpful, what I've seen in going through these old quilt work patches that are now growing back is without going in and planting them, because the gap in space isn't very large, the sun isn't cooking the shit out of that ground. There's shady times. And what you see is the forest, if you look at, here's the tall trees of the forest at the edge of the cut, and then here's this regen, and you go 6 feet further, here's this regen, you go 6 feet further, here's this regen. And so what they're doing is they're filling in, and the first trees to start growing were the ones closest to the big ones. And you see those little patches filling in really nicely, right? And they'll do that by
Yeah.
themselves. So when you make this massive clear cut block, what do? You create erosion, you create sunlight that's breaking in and cooking the shit out of the ground. And these are ecosystems that have been under shade for millennia. You know, you're
Yeah.
doing a lot of damage to the soil itself when you're doing that, right? So you look at a clear cut block when you go through it, it looks so dry and crappy compared to in the undergrowth of the forest where there's humidity and there's fungal things growing and mosses, and there's this interconnectedness of life. More and more companies like Russ Fraser are understanding that if you leave a couple mother trees, if you go into a block, so one of the things we were doing last year too was picking trees they can't have. And those would be generally the biggest ones. And what the biggest ones do is they're the mother trees. They
Yeah.
help everything around just take off and grow, right? So when you clear
Mhm.
cut a whole area, there's no cooperation in that ecosystem to all regrow. Everything goes back to the same height and it becomes this massive forest fire hazard. The damage to the soil is long term, and it doesn't, like, we don't see it that way because in our lifetime we don't really see it, but we have been creating the conditions to further desertify the province, right?
Mhm.
That's just
I'm
one of
I'm
the
glad
ways
you.
it's happening.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask really quick before we move on, was if you knew what kind of vegetation proliferates after ground disturbance, like big ground disturbance on clear cuts, because there's going to be some plants that are going to do well, but clearly like moss and, some of the
Yep.
moss and more, yeah,
Well,
finicky.
it starts
Yeah.
all back at the very beginning, right? So then you have your alders and willows and shrubby, shit like that that grows in and begins the process all over again. And those plants are what helps restore the soils in the long run, but it takes a lot of time. So you look at
Right.
those blocks and you see those, and blackberries are like that in the coast too, right? Like as soon as an area has been disturbed, those thick blackberry bushes just take over, right? And it's like they're a plant that does that too. They stabilize the soil. They give back to the soils. So it's kind of like you
Okay.
need them to come through first in order for the
Yeah.
forest to naturally replenish itself, which it will in time.
Yeah.
How many
So ground,
thousands of years for some places, I don't
yeah,
know.
right. Yeah. And so that again leads to ground stability, because last year what we experienced here in the province was wild, like with all those slides happening, and Vancouver was like essentially like an island just surrounded by, water and slides. And so do you think there's a connection there?
Mm, not not incredibly. I think people wanted to make that connection, and this is one of the things that bothers me about the left is is they do what the right wing does. They get half a truth and then they run with it, right? And
Hmm.
they cry, "Look!" And then people kind of roll their eyes and say, "Well, that's only half fucking true. You're not fooling anybody, right?" So, uh, what was the cause of some of those major landslides? Well, first of all, you have a climate change situation where the atmospheric rivers, the intensity of the atmospheric rivers, have been at times notably stronger, right? So you had in that atmospheric river at one time, if you measured the moisture in the air uh, that was traveling through the Pacific and landing right at BC, it would be it would have had 25 times the volume of the Nile River. So you think about how big the biggest river in the world is and how much water is in it, right? 25 times that just floating in the air to BC. So you have that. Then you have all these forest fires that just rip the forest ecosystem up. And after forest fires, what also happens is you get this layer of ash and mud and shit on everything that if it gets wet becomes super slippery. Right. So it's really, really great. And especially all the roots are burned up and that stuff starts going. Uh, Steep country after fire is amazing generator of landslides, right? So those are the two big things. Now, how is logging involved? Maybe in some responsibility to the behavior of the fires themselves because of the condition of our forests, right? So we have, and then with the fires, that's half climate change, half chance because of how weather is, and then it's part the condition of our forests in which they fire can spread very easily and move very fast now through these uncared for forests that are, seemingly managed for profit and not for the health of the forest. And I mean, those things are starting to change a little bit because they understand that they can't just keep doing the same thing forever. Eventually, we're going to have to be more like the Europeans and be like, okay, every tree we got to make total use of. We can't just leave slash piles of shit. We got to pick that stuff up and use it for energy creation or whatever, right? Make products of it or whatever. We can't leave huge slash piles in the forest. So the condition of our forests, with monoculture and juvenile trees, and I'm telling you, fire rips through regen forests and rips through second growth forests much faster than it does forest of old growth trees, and no one can argue that.
Yeah. Well, it's already, we already know that the forests stay, I don't know how many degrees cooler during heat waves, but you can feel it. All it takes is just going out into the bush to feel that it's a little bit cooler there than it is in the open tent. So obviously in these cuts, it's going to be a bit hotter, which is an issue. So I guess,
Well,
okay,
the
the,
difference in fire behavior between 25 degrees and 30 degrees is big, right? So you have
okay,
open areas where more sunlight's getting in. Fire
yeah,
itself, its behavior becomes more. You have fire creeping around at the bottom of a forest, even when it's 25 degrees outside. You can have a 25-degree day, and then the ground be cooking to over 30 degrees out in the open, right? So you could have those crossover conditions happening on a micro scale all over.
I have a really quick question about that because you work in this field a lot. So this is diverging a little bit away from the main topic, but as far as like forest fire regeneration goes, like I feel like the area that I live in either needs like a really good cultural burn or just needs like a good burn because of just, and I don't like to use the word invasive species lightly. Like just I guess like a species that proliferates really well, you know? They are the Saskatoon plants, like they're great, but they tend to really take over. Like I'm saying, really take over, and they're
The
very
ones
hard
that grow
to
like 10 feet
manage.
tall, eh?
Yes, and then all the babies, they have like just millions of little, of these little woody shoots that you just are so hard to manage. As soon as you cut it, it's like it loves being cut, and it just grows even more. So I am, wondering about that, about wildfire activity as regeneration. Um, yeah, what does that look like?
Well, the thing is, if you disturb that land, you may have those same plants come fill in, right? Because that's what they do is they fill that niche
Yeah.
in the system. Um,
Yeah, okay.
but certainly, I mean, you'll know because of who you are that the condition of the forests here in modern times compared to what we refer to candidly as prehistory, which isn't prehistory, it's someone else's history. And my boys will talk about that when we're on the line together. Talk about just how shitty the forests are, and talk about like, hey, in the day, like near our communities, we didn't have sticks and stuff, and everything was cared for in a way that we don't have a comprehension of. And people are like, well, how's that possible that all the forests were cared for like that by the native people? That sounds like nonsense. Yeah, except for you're playing video games and wasting your time, and you have people who just wander around the forest doing things, hanging out, looking for food, looking for animals, looking for good rocks to use, looking for killing time during the day. It's nice out. Well, we're not just gonna go sit in our fucking hovel and play on our phones all day. So like, how is it possible that natives could keep the forest so maintained? Well, it's actually very simple. I mean, you don't have much to do, and you have a lot of free time because food was much easier to come by than people realize in a lot of places, but not everywhere. But certainly here in BC, a lot of people were blessed with abundance of food, right? So you got time. You got time to go around and pick, of course, and you need to burn wood for firewood. And when you're not falling big trees down because you're some lumberjack, what are you doing? You're picking shit up off the ground and
Yeah.
removing the ground fuels and breaking branches off so that you can walk through the forest easily because you want to be able to walk through the forest easily when you're hunting. So now you don't have branches hitting you in the face everywhere. Now ladder fuels are less present. It's not like it was some amazing system that we should look at like, wow, they really had it figured out. It's like, no, if you just live that way, that's what's going to fucking happen. And if you put your number one motive to be in life to like, let's all make money, work 40 hours a week, help rich guys get rich. We'll go in there with machines, hack the forest down for 12 hours, and we'll go home, call it a day under that model because you're just going to work and doing it as job. Let's go fix forest. Okay, let's go home. Time to play on phone. And there's
Yeah.
no connection. And I'll tell you that about those loggers because they'd see us out there snowshoeing around in the fucking wilderness alone. And those guys would be like, man, at 4 in the morning, I will not get out of the cab of my machine. They're scared of grizzly bears. They're scared of wolves. They're scared. And they would sit there at the dinner table and say to Dave and I, you guys are the real men here. These guys from Blackwater who've been loggers for 30 fucking years. And they're old boys and they're good boys and they're cool. They're old and they've all been together for that long. Like this is a long time unit and they're good loggers. And they're like, you guys are the real men. Like without you, we don't get any. There's not a tree we're allowed to cut without you. Like you're out there alone. Fuck. You're like, aren't you ever? I show them the video of a wolf walking up on me. They're like, you're lucky. I'm like, yeah, I'm lucky. And then I didn't realize what he meant was like he's like, no, you're lucky. And I was like, look at the video. He's got his tail between his fucking legs. You
Yeah.
you tough ass fucking machine operating loggers, right? So like, there's a disconnect. They just go and do the job and go home, right? There's not communion with living in nature because there's no time for that in modern society. We're just nature's a place we go and get what we need, and we ship the money to Vancouver. All those
That's
people
right.
who live in the big cities and that big clear cut, they can't afford to live and have a good life if we're not up here making clear cuts and mines and farms. We're feeding their civilization while they sit there and criticize us, the working people, for how it gets done. So, that's a disconnect too. And again, I'm not defending clear cuts and I'm not defending logging,
For real.
right? But I've been in the forest long enough that I can speak knowledgeably and I can, tell you which companies really take care, which ones don't. I can tell you, what West Fraser's trying to do now in looking ahead, thinking like, wow, we need wood in 30 years. That's a
Yeah.
business concern of theirs now, right? So,
Yeah.
uh, but even in doing so, like, maybe their practices are getting better, but there isn't time for that communion with nature, right? And it's not,
Yeah.
and as a simple fact, isn't because Native people were better and put them on a pedestal. It's like, no, I just had people who, uh, well, for a couple of weeks, we got a lot of fish to deal with. And then we got well, then, or if you're over here, the bison are coming through at this time or whatever, right? There's times of the year where you got to be really busy. And then there's times of the year where you head over the mountains and pick a fight with Chakotay and steal a couple of their women. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well,
That was a
well,
big war.
I was just doing, a section on traditional ecological knowledge, and it was the first time I ever heard of that because it's a Western academic coined term. They call it tech, traditional ecological knowledge, and but the indigenous peoples were like, they didn't have that term of being like an environmentalist. That was just,
Yeah.
an obligation in their morality and belief system already. So, some of the elders thought that the term traditional ecological knowledge, they found it, comical a bit. And, because now it's being understood more in the Western, academic world. So, yeah,
Well,
so I get
that's
that.
the
And
thing,
yeah,
though, right? It's like we're trying to look at it as a separate thing, traditional ecological knowledge, but it
yeah,
really wasn't that way because it's just like, well, we live here, and this is what's going on, and this is how you
yeah,
live here, right? So we put
yeah,
it on some pedestal, like like,
yeah.
oh, they really had it figured out back then. No, it's just like a culture develops around a certain way of being, and now we got time. We got time to walk in our forests and look at stuff and make art and tell stories and if we're in the forest doing things and there's a branch in my well, we need firewood for the let's go. So taking care of the forest and having that knowledge, I don't think it was like some mystical thing. It's
No,
just a result of the situation and the condition. And now we have a different condition. There is no communion like that. And people who think they have communion don't. And even within First Nations people, because you're being pulled by whatever it is, whether it's the phones or lights or technology or jobs or economy or fucking liquor or whatever, right? You're getting caught into this fucking modern problem that forces your attention away from a simpler way of being, right? So I think we're not going to solve our problems easily if we keep looking at ourselves and nature as two separate things,
mm,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah, agreed.
we're not going to solve our problems easily if we put people who we've seriously wronged on pedestals and expect them to fix it or have the answers. That's fucked up,
Right.
right? That's how it is, right? Everyone's looking at you for answers.
Yeah,
Traditional ecological knowledge. Go
right.
fuck
Yeah.
yourselves. You ruined everything. Now you want my take on it after squashing
Yeah,
us so that you
yeah,
can ruin
for real.
everything?
It's been the last couple of years. It's all of a sudden it's just everywhere now, and I'm like, well, how that's fine, but how come not before? How come it's taken until all of this has come out? The things that we already knew about, we already knew, and now everybody wants to have that conversation,
Well, it's just
and
the lefty liberal flavor of the month. And you can look through time. It might be Reiki for a while, the new age fucking
yeah,
lefty
yeah.
liberal thing. It's like so right now. I mean, seize the trend while you got it, right? But does it stay that way? I don't know. Maybe, but
I feel like a
the
lot of people
damage.
want a lot
You
of
know the
people want to
damage.
gain access to indigenous knowing without any sort of form of compensation, and I think that there's a problem with that, so that's something that I talk about. But I have another question, and it's about the water.
I was
Yeah,
just
I
gonna
just wanted.
say, you know the damage this does, and then you said it for me.
the damage this does to the water. Yeah, I'd like you
No,
if you
no, no, no.
could.
To your people. Sorry, going back to the last
Oh yeah.
conversation, the damage it does, expecting that, wanting that, and
Yeah.
commodifying it, and putting it in a pedestal, and putting expectations on it, and pressure.
Mhm.
Like, oh, you guys have the answers.
And oftentimes, Joey, it looks like it's in this little box too. And I've had people say to me, like, oh, I want to know about, Indigenous peoples, but not like that. Not like the land defenders, not like, what they see as protesters, not like that. They don't want to see that side. They want to see this very spiritual, holistic side that,
The
what they want to see, a very
flower.
narrow view.
I'm in communion
So
with the flower.
I have a problem with
Everything's
that.
nice. Yeah, I hate that
You're not
shit.
going to get that from me.
Well, and you know because you've known me long enough that I've never tried to get any specific
Yeah.
knowledge, but I was always willing to fight, so I was always invited in, right?
Yeah.
So you're
So
talking about the water. Let's go back. Let's get on topic again.
yeah, I just wanted to ask you, I'm just going to ask you straight up, like, what are the effects and influences on the water, if there are any at all?
Well, I mean, these are obvious questions, and of course, you probably know the answers. In some ways, we're doing better to create buffer zones in waterways to prevent um, just siltifying our creeks all to hell. So there's been some real progress in 30 years in some of that stuff. That's good. When you have a large clear cut and too steep of an area and that silting process starts at the top, well, that's a problem. So, but they try to mitigate these things. They try to mitigate these things. But all in all, like, and it's not just about the water on the ground. When you're breaking up this water cycle. So we think about water, we only think about the water that we see running, right? And we can imagine the damage that forestry has done to that. In fact, that seems very simple to imagine that. I mean, everyone who doesn't even know anything could probably talk about that. Well, how could logging affect the water? But what they don't think about too is the water cycle on a larger whole, which is water comes in several states. It comes in a gas as well. And you used to have a situation in BC where you have uh, really tall, really healthy, strong, big forests everywhere from coast to mountains. And you talked about it earlier, the humidity levels within the forest. The transportation highway that the trees allowed for water to move itself cyclically through the province, right? In terms of as a fog or as rainfall or as humidity in general, right? So one of the effects that we've had on water is how water in the weather cycles through the province. And that's one that people don't really think about, right? And then you have another thing. Now you have heavy rainfall. We got this climate change scenario going on. We got an atmospheric river and it's just pouring water. And because you have gaps in the forest and gaps in that ability to hold water, the water makes it to the creeks faster and can cause flash floods a little faster, right? Do I think
Okay.
that we can blame the landslides and flash floods on logging? Well, we talked about that earlier, like from 2 years from last year. Like, well, not really. Not the way the left wanted to, or that
Not entirely. Yeah.
environmentalists wanted to. They wanted to point the finger right away, and I was like, hey, I'm on your side, but you're wrong.
Right. Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
but that is part of it, right? Is that we don't have that ability for the forest itself. You just think about uh, you take away 60% of the trees, and then you lessen the volume of what's there. Was what I mean when I say take away. You take away 60% of the volume. Maybe there's more trees now than there used to be because big trees take up space. So maybe there's more trees than there is now, but that cycling of moisture across the province, from the coast up and over Quesnel into the Cariboo Mountains here. There's that, and then there's once the water falls, the rain falls, and it's falling heavier at times now because of some climate change things as well. And then how much water can the earth soak up? And then only then can we talk about the water on the ground, because the water on the ground comes from somewhere. I mean, sometimes underground,
Mhm.
but underground isn't affected greatly by logging, right? So
Yeah.
uh, your moisture cycle, volume, how does it release, and then we could talk about what does the effect logging have on our waterways, on the salmon and fish, and we could come up with all kinds of thoughts on that.
Okay.
And
I just
and
thought
to
of,
qualify, it's gotten better. People, people are trying, but they're still trying from a business model,
yeah.
and they're not trying from concern for the earth or our future the same way they are to
Mm.
make sure that West Fraser has trees for 30 years.
They're just abiding by, environmental assessments or, protocols.
And that's all that they don't care completely. They don't see the world the way I do.
Yeah.
They care in their way, and they think that they want to believe they're not doing a great deal of damage, and this is forest management, but they don't see through the eyes that you and I see through.
Right. I don't begrudge what people do to, feed their families. So, and again, I just want to make that, and I'm trying really hard to not come from a biased place, but I feel like I already am. Like I look at my questions and I think that, okay, I'm already coming from a very biased place.
Well,
Even
you got
though
wood right behind you in your door frames. It's like, and it's like, and of course you know this because you're involved with some native warriors who would fight against a gold mine, and you're promoting and advertising and sending word about your fight out, and what's in your computer gadget, but it's a piece of gold,
for real.
right? It's like you're using gold to say we shouldn't be
Absolutely.
gold mining, and
And
it's like,
I absolutely don't ever, claim to be, something that I'm not. I understand that we are all complacent to a degree,
no, we're not complacent.
Um,
We just don't have much of a choice either,
uh,
right? But they'll point at
yeah, I
us and
mean,
be like, that's a weakness. The same way they might say, like, whoa, just go back to the old ways of bows and arrows. And, when they're talking down to native people, right? Like, what do you need guns for? You can go back to the old ways. Well, come on, that's bullshit. And everyone knows that, right? Yeah, I got wood in my house. Yeah, we need wood. Yeah, I got families in Quesnel who are having a good life because they have solid work in the mills and in the forest. So, we're
mm,
only looking at it from a lefty environmentalist place. Well, the problem is those lefty environmentalists forgot what the left wing was really about in the first place, which is about social struggle. That's where it came from. The environmental movement almost detached itself from class struggle, like the two things aren't connected, right? No, the people in Quesnel who are feeding their families and they're part of a union, and these aren't bad people, and it's not a bad thing that their families are taken care of. So there's always
agreed.
going to be logging because you need wood in the back of your house, and there's going to be mining because I like using my technology and my gadgets. So it's not, we can't come from a place of like, this is wrong. And I know you probably don't, but it's how are we going to, the problem again is what eyes are people looking through when they're doing these things? And they don't see things the way we do. There's this disconnect between humans and nature. And I don't know how we're going to actually solve our environmental crisis while still being stuck in the mindset of capitalism, growth, greed, my picket fence. It's all about us,
Yeah,
get my
I know.
retirement.
I'm trying to work that all out too, Joey, and I can't figure that one out either right now. That's
And then they'll point
a
at you.
big
They'll be like, well, you
question.
have wood in your house. Yeah, I do. Fuck off.
I know.
Just learn
I
how to
really
log
don't.
properly. That's got nothing to do with what's in my house.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I've got a couple more questions I was hoping to maybe go over before I let you go. Um, okay, this is the topic of glyphosate. Is that like really a thing where they spray the broadleaf foliage to gain access to the money timbers? Okay.
Yeah.
Can you
They,
elaborate
they
at
do it so
all
that
about that?
what they're trying to do is skip over that cycle that we first talked about, which is the broad leaves come in to become a nitrogen fixer for the cycle of
Okay.
restoring the soils, right? So what they're going to do instead is fry them so they don't cut the light out, so that we can go with tree planters and plant saplings. It's insane, and that's one that I just can't believe we're in the 21st century and we're doing this. And I don't think that the problem is it's poisoning everything. No, I'm sure it's relatively benign after a certain length of time that it's in the environment. That's not like it breaks down. It's not like a thing like you put it in there and you're like, now there's a toxic chemical that's going to destroy everything it touches forever. No, it's not like that. But what you're doing is you're killing off everything that a moose might want to eat. And one of
Yeah.
the benefits of clear cuts is that the moose love it because all that broadleaf stuff grows in, and they go out there and they spend all day eating that stuff. So now in the Prince George Forestry Zone, they're going around spraying that stuff, and the moose got nothing to eat.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
stupid.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't know the cause and effect of it on moose. Like I knew that it had, I just didn't understand it completely. I thought it was more to do with genetics or something, but
Well,
okay. So that's
then it becomes more like corn farming in Iowa or something, right? Where you just nuke the soil and then throw some fertilizer on it and just keep growing. And no matter how depleted the soil is, we just keep growing corn every year.
right.
That's the same thing that we're kind of doing by removing that necessary component of regenerating the forest, which is those broadleaf things coming in
Hmm.
and becoming a nitrogen fixer, right? Like they
Okay.
actually are fertilizer, their effect. So there's going to be 20 or 30 years of them doing that before other trees start to. This is the way of natural regeneration, right? So you're trying to cut that part out so you can just get back to growing a forest again. Well, how long can you do that before the soil is just like, okay, well, now we're going to go drop fertilizer too.
Right. And don't broadleaf foliage trees slow down forest fires?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
They don't burn
Okay.
worth shit. I will tell you that. Like we're in a fire and we walk by an area that's like real hot, but it's a whole bunch of this alder. And the boy's like, "Oh, that could escape from there." And we're like, we better deal with that. And I was like, that ain't going nowhere, boys. See that thing over there that doesn't look like it's going anywhere? That's what's going to go somewhere. Let's go get that, right? So,
Hmm.
keep your eye on that area. And we come back to it and eventually deal with it. But it's like, it's just going to creep around in that alder all day, all week.
Hmm.
It's not going to come out of the ground and go ripping.
Okay. Um,
I mean, just try to burn that stuff. It's when it's green.
have you done like a lot of like I don't know. I don't feel comfortable saying like sustainable or just like the word like no more like destructive, right? And I
If I
think that
logged
that's
properly,
yeah, like have you done a lot of
yes.
I mean I guess sustainable logging is a better way rather than saying not destructive logging.
I don't want to even put that word on it because that
Yeah,
implies that there's two different ways. And no, I just say, have I
yeah.
logged correctly? Yes.
Mhm.
What did that look like? It can mean different things. In our case, we weren't horse logging or nothing. We had a skidder, and I went around the forest, and John or I picked individual trees because it was cedar on his property that had value. It was like 20 grand a fucking truckload or something like that 2 years ago or something at the mill. So
Right.
we went
Yeah.
and went through his forest. He's got 60 acres or something, and he's every 6 years gone and done this, and or 6 to 10 years. So we went and we took several truckloads out of his 60 acres. So I go in, follow the tree, or I put the cuts in if it's tangled up with a bunch of shit. Because there's no need to be falling with the skidder there. I put the cuts in, leave the wedge, and the skidder comes and knocks it over. And then we put chains on, and we got little skid trails that go through the forest. And yeah, they do break up the tracks of the skidder. They do break up the soil and they do break up the mycelium layers and the funguses and mosses. But in comparison to opening up an entire clear cut, that's pretty minor.
Yeah.
And that can fill in time, and it will. Right. So
Hmm.
have I logged properly? Yeah. I mean, that's how to do it. And we're going to have, and I mean, that's how it's being done more and more within reach of Quesnel because they don't have cut blocks anymore. You know what I mean? Now, when we
Okay.
were doing timber cruising last year closer to town, we were going in and individual select. And most of that the loggers themselves do. We tell them what they can't cut down, which I was saying, the mother trees. So there is
Okay.
changes that have been happening closer to towns. But as you get further and further out to the mountains, those changes don't manifest. It's still old school logging going on, right?
Yeah. So that actually that with that it brings me, I have to come to my, my thesis question. This is more for me to my own thesis question that I have to try to answer. But I did come up, my underpinning question of all of this is how can we assert proper logging practices as an economical replacement strategy from, and I used destructive logging as I wrote it down, but now I'm going to remove that, and other logging practices as like, old growth logging and clear cuts.
Well,
I mean, that's a big question. I know that's a big question.
the idea has to be to not farm, but to garden. That has to be the idea. If we treat our forests like a garden, and that's, a garden is more like a park than a farm is. You know what I'm saying? Like, we got to get into that attitude of treating our forests not like farms. So that's the number one thing, first of all, right? Some clear cuts, yeah. But it's like right now, because the government says, okay, well, we go out and flag a whole bunch of stuff off and say, West Fraser claims this isn't Tolko's. And the government says, okay, well, you can take this much percentage out of it. And then so we go and we set that up. And it's all very mathematical and sort of cold. Having a point, that's what I was getting at, to why we're logging an area, right? So it's not just because it's a bidding war and
Okay.
it's a war out there between different companies to claim forest so that they can log it, but to actually have a reason. So like you look at
Purpose, yeah.
Cornell and be like, we need forest fire breaks. So here's our
Okay.
logging plan. So but then, then we start to look at socialism, because basically we're talking about having a plan, which means someone has to make that plan, which means there has to be government involved. Oh my God. It can't just be the chaos of the economic system taking whatever it can get its hands on. So we need
Okay.
a fire break here. And then we look at our land and say, hey, this is really good soils out that area. Let's log that area and sell those plots to farmers, to homesteaders, and have actually development plans for our forests, right? Like I was sitting on top of this hill with Dave last year and Steve, and we could see those mountains in the Chilcotin. Probably see them in my videos sometimes, that are like super beautiful. The Ilgachas, the Itches and Ilgachas, those two mountains that are volcanic mountain ranges. And sitting up there, and I said, man, like if there was, a couple, not like resorts, but like, a wilderness resort where there's like cabins and things. And you took a spot like this, I said, where you can, there's a beautiful view of the, and if we're gonna log the backside a little bit, well, and select log it. Well, then why not make the road that goes up here go to a little tower that, so there's like development plans so that people have reason to want to go out to these places. Like, and here you have like just endless wilderness. There's people who are dying for property, dying for housing, but what we're doing is we're putting everyone in towns, and then we're fucking everything up around
Great.
outside the towns so the towns can live. So there's no
Great.
vision for what we're
Yeah.
trying to do on the whole, right? And that's the same with our country. There's no vision for
Yeah.
the country that everybody shares,
Mhm.
especially. They can't even agree on what we are, let alone where we're going. And so without a vision, we're just always stuck in this mode of, the economic imperialism of West Fraser owning everything around here for its own
Mhm.
interests. Of course, they do some good things. They keep families fed. They
Yeah.
keep products going all over the world. People need our
Yeah.
firewood. People need our wood, right? So
Yeah.
it's so much more complicated than like, is logging good or bad?
Yeah. Yeah. No, for real. And I actually hadn't considered that. And so I appreciate that insight. So like having a purpose beyond just profit, So yeah, go and log this area, but have a purpose beyond just taking it and then leaving and then, not coming back or just replanting it, I guess. Like, yeah, I get that. And I think I can elaborate on that a little bit more.
Like, West
So
Fraser,
yeah,
you can
yeah.
log around this lake if and we're going to sell the property after to so and so, and maybe they're going to build 15 cabins. And now we got this road that you've put in there. You're not going to deactivate the road afterwards. You're going to allow it to be open so the public can go and use it. And you have to be sensible about it, because you don't want to affect ecosystems and affect animals. But at the same time, like, we are animals. we should be able. We shouldn't have sections of our province that are basically unusable for the average person, where there's just nothing there. You want to go down there in the wintertime, but you can't because the logging trucks will run you off the road because it's their road, and that's the way it is. You don't go. You know what I mean? So it end up like part of the disconnect is that we just don't have any reason to go to these places or use them, and we have all this land that's not being used, and all these people who don't have places to live. And what we've done is we've created a system where some people are getting very rich, and then the managers are living pretty good lives, and then the workers are still having pretty good lives, and it trickles down. But there's no grand vision.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's awesome, Joey. I really appreciate all of that. Yeah, I mean, and then like before we started, I said to you, like I have some other logger friends. My dad was a logger, it's not like I don't understand. I certainly do. I'm looking across the mountains right now and I can see like massive clear cuts at the bottoms of these beautiful mountains, and they are growing back. I mean, I actually go up to them and I berry pick. The berries do quite well in them actually. So I do go in there,
Well, if we don't, you
especially
think about all those people making a living in logging. Well, what's going to happen if there's no logging? I guess we're just all going to move to Vancouver and live off the bounty that Vancouver's producing. There
yeah,
doesn't,
yeah,
the
for
bounty
real.
it's producing comes from here, right?
Hmm.
It doesn't create
Yeah,
anything on its own. It takes everything
yeah,
and manufactures them or sells them or trades them or ships them, but they they don't
yeah,
have fucking anything without us cutting wood down, mining gold, making food, right? You can't just be like, oh, I wish logging should stop. What do you want those guys to do? You want us to go and become city slickers too? I mean, already, like I was saying, the culture is so screened now. It's so everyone's so connected to an idea, but they don't know what the idea is. And it's like everyone's so distracted. There is no disconnection. Now you want to disconnect us even further by being like, you can't even go out there and work. Just gonna have to go to the city and become poor like everyone down there.
and not suggesting any of that either.
Yeah.
I guess I just wish to understand it a little bit more. I mean, it certainly took care of us. I mean, when growing up, that's what took care of me. That's what my dad was doing, and yeah, I guess there's just been like this hyper focus on the old growth cutting. And I was like trying to figure out what do they even use the trees for? Like, what do they even use the old growth trees for that they can't go and pick other trees?
Oh, lots of stuff. Fucking some of that stuff, cedar. It's like for shingles.
Yeah,
I know.
okay.
That's the thing. Like, so people are at Fairy Creek last year, and they're all mad, and everyone's mad because of Fairy Creek. And then I'm out timber cruising the Chilcotin in this forest that's 200 years old, and the trees are this big, literally. And people are sending me hate mail. And I'm like, this ain't fucking Fairy Creek, man. Look around. 60% of the forest is blown over. I'm like
Yeah,
fighting my way through blowdown all day. It's like, no, this forest is fucked. It needs some
yeah,
fuel removal. Like something needs to be done
right.
here. I'm doing
Yeah,
I'm just working a job, man. It's not my fault they're fucking logging everything. I got kids
right.
to feed. I didn't want to go do that all winter. You're sitting down there in Vancouver calling me a hypocrite? Well, you got everything fucking delivered to your city in trucks and trains and boats. Yeah, you're so much better than me. You're so enlightened. While I'm out in some
Yeah.
blowdown in minus 15, getting my ass kicked in the wilderness. Some
Yeah.
softy sitting on a couch somewhere be like, Fairy Creek, look at Joey. I thought he was against fucking environmental destruction. What a hypocrite.
Yeah, I remember years ago when I was 18 or 19 doing the pine beetle probing, and that was really interesting. I learned a lot when I was out there in the bush doing that. And I just thought it was wild to me, like all the trees that they would just fall and burn. I mean, I get it in some of the spots that it needed to be done, but a lot of those trees now look at it's just being it makes great firewood and it also makes great furniture,
Yeah.
the pine beetle kill.
It's a big part of our problem, right? Is we're creating a lot of waste. And so if this was Europe, all that slash wood and shit, you'd be getting picked up and transported to one kind of factory or another, whether it's to create to heat the fucking town's water, or you got gasification systems, or to grind it into pulp or whatever, right? Uh,
Yeah.
they don't have enough forest in Germany to go clear cut the black forest, but they're still logging it. And we think that BC can't be profitable on a better system. It's just like the Albertans who are mad at everybody. They're mad at Trudeau, and they're mad, because the oil jobs are gone, da da da. And they're mad at Rachel Notley, and they're mad at the lefties. And you look at Norway, and they've been taxing companies for taking their stuff, and they're making huge money off of companies coming and work in their areas, and everyone's living better for it. And it's like, Alberta, you went 60 years without a fucking plan, and now you're mad at everybody else because it was just first come, first serve money party. And we got to get out of that mentality with everything: forestry, mining, oil and gas, all the commodities that we need to maintain our civilization on some level, to grow technologically to a better way, which I think is possible for humanity. Be able to generate power and without, fucking combustion engines and stuff, right? So it's possible, but in order to do that, I guess you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's got to be a shift for sure. We're always talking about it and thinking about it. It's always on our consciousness, but it, like again, you said, it's these people who are sitting there in their suits and their offices, and these very rich people who are making decisions, and we're all just trying to survive it. So
We have so much in Canada. There shouldn't be any poor person, and there shouldn't
mm,
be any fucking ecological catastrophes, and there shouldn't be 60 years of oil and gas production with the province of Alberta having no other plan for when that stops working.
yeah,
It's just so stupid. Everyone's in their stupidity. They're like mad at Trudeau, just doubling down on stupidity instead of being like, man, we as a civilization don't have a plan.
Awesome. Well, you answered all my questions, Joe. You're like awesome. You were definitely the guy for the job today, and I appreciate that so much.
Right on, Jolene.
I
Nice to
I
talk to you.
appreciated, yeah, I appreciate your contrasting views, and very very real and easy to understand, and yeah, I should be able to get my job done now a little bit
Well, the thing
easier.
is, I can't say I'm against logging, and I can't say I'm for logging
No.
because those are shortcuts to thinking. It's like, well, I'm in
Hmm.
favor of truthful perspective,
Right.
which means you have to kind of abandon everyone's. The left is like, "Whoa, this is totally bad all the time."
Mhm.
Logging is why we have landslides. Which is maybe a little bit true. And then you have the right wings like, those lefty assholes, don't they know we make the wood? And you just get these stupid
I
arguments that
can't,
are black and white. It's not about truth.
for
It's about
sure.
it's about having a gimmicky thing to say back at someone. Good to talk to you,
Yeah.
Jolene.
Yeah. Yeah, you too, Joey. I hope you have a really good day.
Yeah, you too.
Okay. Take care.
Okay, bye now.